Hi, and welcome to this week's Purdue at Westgate webinar series. My name is Samantha Nelson, and I am the Program Manager for the Purdue Foundry at the Westgate Academy. If you aren't familiar with our webinar series, we at Purdue at Westgate strive to provide relevant and value-added topics to specific audiences like yourselves. We typically have done this on a weekly basis in person at the Westgate Academy, but obviously due to the nature of today's environment, we are excited to be able to provide these to you virtually. If you were fortunate to join us in last week's webinar, you will be familiar with today's presenter, Joe Danaher. Joe, who is a senior security analyst for the Ame Group, along with his colleague Jennifer Arena, presented last week on cybersecurity and the best practices for a telecommuting workforce. This week, Joe is providing a more in-depth presentation on the CMMC Level 3, along with changes and updates that will be necessary for anyone that has Department of Defense contracts that involve handling controlled, unclassified information. Another familiar voice joining us is Liz Robinson. Liz is the strategic advisor for the Ame Group out of the Evansville metro area. Liz will be moderating questions that you will be able to ask via the Q&A function on Teams. Liz will do her best to interject with Joe so that she will be provided answers as quickly as possible. At the end of the presentation, several resources will be provided for you to potentially follow up with on any other questions that you might have. So again, we thank you for joining us for this week's webinar, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. Joe?
Good morning, everyone. That's out there. Thank you for joining us, and we will get into this presentation. We kind of came up with this title, and the content has somewhat morphed over the last few weeks as we get ongoing updates from the DoD on this. So this is going to definitely cover the title. We hope to go a little bit beyond that in our presentation here. So with that, we'll get going. See, I'm kind of waiting for my first slide there.
Joe, it's up and running. You can go.
Okay, thanks. Just to get started there, there's some, I guess, some acronyms we need to know as far as some definitions go. Whenever you're dealing with the government or really any technology these days, it's good to just, I find, to get everybody on the same level, and some of these acronyms will be covered in this presentation. And then actually the CMMC has a list that is 40 pages long. If you need some reading material before you go to sleep, we're going to provide that in a link in our Q&A for you for that full document. But just to make sure we're on the same page, we're going to be talking about the CMMC. So as most of you know, that's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification that is really going to take the NIST 800-171 to a new level with any DoD contracts, and it's going to be a phased implementation over the next 5 years. We're going to discuss CUI because that's really going to separate the level that most small and medium businesses will need as far as whether you're going to be a level 1 or a level 3, and we'll get into that. So the CUI is controlled unclassified information, and we'll talk a lot about that. DoD, of course, is the Department of Defense. We're going to talk a little bit and touch on DR, which is disaster recovery. We'll talk about FCI, which is federal contract information. NIST standards, right? That's our tax dollars at work. They do a good job. National Institute of Standards and Technology, that drives a lot of our cybersecurity standards, excellent resource for frameworks, right, for risk management. Most of you who have been doing NIST 800-171 contracting, you're familiar with POAM, right? A plan of action and milestones. We're going to talk a little bit about some technical controls, and we'll talk about firewalls. And with that, IPS and IDS, that is characteristics of a modern firewall, right? Intrusion prevention and intrusion detection systems that are built into those. And then we're going to talk about a SIM. Some people like to say SIEM, but both are acceptable, so I say SIM. But if you're not familiar with what that is, that stands for Security Incident and Event Management. And essentially what that does, we'll talk about, but it collects your logs for you, and then it has some machine learning built in for alerting, but it also usually requires a human to manage that and go through that. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we progress. I wanted to start this out. We're trying to keep a close tab on this just for our customers that we service, and then a lot of questions we're getting from different areas, manufacturers especially, that do work for the DoD. And there was a presentation that I have a link there for you that's on YouTube from late last month. And Katie Arrington, maybe some of you have heard of her. She is the CISO for the DoD Department of Acquisition. So she has been really spearheading the CMMC once that was determined to be the direction. And she's done a great job. She's a really good presenter, and she's a source of truth in all this, right? So we like to depend on that. But one of her comments in that presentation was, don't wait to prepare for CMMC because our adversaries are not waiting. And so when you think about why are they moving from NIST 800-171 self-assessment and POAMs to a model that's going to be audited, it is to really improve cybersecurity defense for all the subcontractors the DoD depends on. In this same presentation, she made an interesting comment that hopefully a lot of you will appreciate, that the DoD doesn't manufacture anything. They depend and rely on subcontractors. So, our national security, it comes down to, is only as secure as the folks, providing the material to the Department of Defense. So I think that there's been a lot of highly publicized breaches in the news, but I like to take it down to something that I see every day in my day-to-day work as a threat hunter and providing security, managed security services. And we do a lot of log review, a lot of threat hunting in the logs, but just an interesting story about Office 365. We have a lot of customers that use Office 365, and one of the logs we look at are, failed and successful login attempts, and geolocating those login attempts and attributing to where are they coming from. And every day, without fail, there are login attempts all over the world, but really centralized in Eastern Europe, Soviet Union, and China. And you see that every day, and you're thinking, gosh, why all that activity? And some are, just criminal organizations trying to break in, and while others are really engaged in state-sponsored espionage. So we had a recent pen testing engagement, and as part of pen testing or penetration testing, we actually use tools that cyber criminals use, right? We're being paid to try to get in. So one of the tools we use is a script that will run automatically. So I just have to load this up, and I don't have to tend to it, right? It's an automated script, and it uses a password dictionary. And what this is, it's a dictionary of thousands of commonly used passwords. You can buy it on the dark web, for example. You can kind of make your own, but it combines that with known email addresses. And so what happens is it will just try to log into Office 365 accounts, and if all you have protecting your account is a password, username and password, it's pretty easy to get in. We were actually able to log in and, gain access to information we definitely shouldn't have had. Think about what's in your email and what goes back and forth in your email. But once you have a breach like that, it can be very damaging. And that's a pretty simple control, right? That's just implementing a control that comes with your Office 365, two-factor authentication. So this is some of the why the DoD is mandating this and doing this. So I thought we'd start out with, usually you end with a summary. I like to start out with a summary of what we do know about the CMMC. It's going to be an audit by a third party. That third party, it's an independent body. It is not part of the DoD. It's not part of the federal government. So it's this Cybersecurity Maturity Model Accreditation Board. These are the folks that are going to provide the training to the auditors, the companies that have auditors available to do audits, and then they will be the ones that will help schedule these audits for you as you have need to get certified. So that piece has not begun. They haven't trained the first auditor yet. They're about 6 weeks behind. What we're being told is that within 2 weeks, they're going to announce that training. So just to back up a little bit, the COVID-19 has not really delayed DoD's goals or timeline, and we'll talk about the timeline here towards the end of the presentation. But just to let you know that they are a little bit behind in this auditor training, so don't have a lot of information about that except for about this accreditation board. Your certification is going to be good for 3 years. The certification expense, the audit expense, is said to be an allowable expense in your contracts. However, any security controls that you need to implement to become compliant, that's the DoD saying that's a cost of doing business. So that is not going to be allowable. The DoD has said their goal is to crawl, walk, run with the rollout of CMMC. So they're going to start with 10 RFIs in June. They're going to do 10 RFPs in September. Over the next 5 years, the intent is to expand CMMC requirement to all DoD contracts. And then my next bullet point there, POAMs will not be accepted. So that's maybe a little bit misleading, because they will not be accepted for purposes of auditing to a CMMC level. So in other words, it's not that you can't have a POAM, you can't have a work plan, a deficiency where you're, say, working from a level 1 to a level 3. However, if you meet level 1, but you have POAMs that would allow you to meet level 3, they're not going to be considered, and you would only be certified at level 1 for CMMC. So that's really what that means. And the maturity levels, they are being mapped to specific standards. All are in NIST 800-171, but there are some other sources. There's about 20 other controls that have been added to be a level 3, for example. So a lot of these aren't new. If you're really doing self-attestation, you should have been doing these all along, although I think everybody knows that's been varying levels of people, that self-attest. Some may not even understand what they're self-attesting to. So part of this is to level that playing field by having an audit that is consistent. So this training for the auditors, they have a great desire to make the training and then the actual audit practice and what they're asking for very consistent across the country. So that is one thing they're really trying to emphasize. But part of this presentation really is going to concern you with whether you need to be a level 1 or a level 3. So we'll talk about the different levels. Level 4 and level 5 are really more primes that handle CUI and, really are large companies, the McDonnell Douglases of the world. So we're really going to focus on levels 1 and 3. We'll talk about 2 as well. But CUI is going to be the really defining component and deciding factor in that. So CMMC is a framework. It's a maturity framework, right? So it's trying to assess the maturity of your cybersecurity controls you have in place. Just like other business practices, right? You evaluate your business on a financial maturity, on a the level of what you're doing, whether it's manufacturing, right? You're looking at what your maturity is on your processes. So this is what this is going to do, and it's really taking the process that you do and really looking very closely at the practices associated with those processes. So that's really what it's meant to be, is a framework, but really that's looking more at the maturity of your cybersecurity controls.
Hey, Joe, we have a quick question.
Okay, sure.
It's Liz. We have a question asking, does a CMMC for an organization or subcontractor require the team members to have accredited certifications in cybersecurity?
It does not. However, we're going to talk about that when I get to the, and I promise, when I get to the costs, we're going to talk about the costs and especially the difference between level 1 and level 3, because that's going to come into play, but there is no requirement for IT certifications at this point.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, this is more about your controls that you have in place. So I think that the key to that is, do you have the staff that can manage those controls? That's really what it comes down to. Yeah, so just looking at the process and practices a little deeper, Jennifer, if you'll go on there for me. Thank you. So it has the various levels and they build upon each other, right? So if you're level 5, you didn't just jump to level 5, you're doing 1 through 4, plus you're doing level 5. And it's really it's combining your processes with your practices. So for level 1, and we're going to get into some specifics, especially level 1 and level 3, as far as, what is basic cyber hygiene, but are you performing it? You can kind of already imagine, okay, do we have a firewall? Do we have antivirus? Some of the basic things we think about. Now, I am going to surprise you because there's a few things in level 1 that you may not be considering. Level 2, we're being told by the DoD, is more of a stepping stone to level 3. So what we're being told on these contracts, these DoD contracts, is there's 330,000 subcontractors to the DoD. We're being told that the vast majority will be required to be level 1. However, and this is the deciding point, right? If we talked about CUI, if you handle CUI, in other words, you have it on your network, you communicate it in your email, you store it on your servers, you're going to be level 3. And so there's quite a big difference, and that's what we're going to spend some time talking about between level 1 and level 3, and the differentiation there of what's managed good cyber hygiene versus performed basic cyber hygiene. And again, what we're being told is these audits for level 1, one impact of COVID-19 is they are going to be able to audit you remotely. But level 3 is going to be, they're going to come on site. It's going to be on site and in person. So that's a couple other differences that are kind of late breaking news, if you will. But level 1 and CMMC, okay, so your processes, they're going to want to verify they're performed, right? So there's specific things that you need to be doing, quite a few things that are basic. You know, users require a username and password? Do you have, you know, do you use VPNs for remote access? Do you have a firewall in place that has IPS and IDS? Because if you have a sonic wall from Best Buy, you may not, right? Or if it's, you know, 6, 7 years old, you may not have that. Do you have updates not only to your operating system, but also to the other pieces of software that are on every computer, like web browser, PDF reader, things like that that are common attack vectors, right? If I'm a cyber criminal, those are ways in if those things aren't patched. So it's, you know, there's several items on this list for level 1, and it's not clear how you're going to have to prove that, but you're going to have to prove that you're doing it.
Hey, Joe, we have another question, and I think it ties into what you just spoke about. The question specifically is, will only the systems that interface with DoD be considered for CMMC, or are all systems for an organization? So, for example, would an irrelevant system like a benefits platform need to be considered as part of CMMC compliance?
So the short answer is probably not. But again, if you're a mature company with a mature security controls, if it's part of that same network, if I can get there, so if I don't have what's called a virtual LAN, if I don't have a VLAN in place, if I have users that can go both places on my network, then that's not going to work. Then it is going to be considered. Now, some folks, they will set up a whole separate network for CUI. And so you can do that. But again, it just depends on your IT configuration currently and when you get that audit. So that's really what it depends on.
Got it. And also, do we have a source of the information indicating level 1 audits can be done remotely? I know it's something that you've been able to uncover.
Yeah, so if you go back to that first slide, that Washington Tech CISOs speak from 4/28, it is in that presentation. It's actually a pretty good presentation now. It is about an hour and a half long, but that is, you know, directly from the folks that are on the CMMC accreditation board. So I think there's a link we'll get to at the end. There's 2 resources we primarily use. One is the DoD and one is that accreditation board. But if that accreditation board site has that piece of information. And like I said, that is something that is that's kind of like late breaking news that we have heard this. But again, there's no training yet. There's no details on what that auditing process is going to be. That's just what we've heard in these presentations.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So here's the thing. You know, I mentioned some of the controls that you're probably doing. Well, here's some that you may not be doing that are actually level 1 requirements in CMMC. So you may be using multi-factor authentication for your email, which is good. Actually, I would tell you, anywhere it's available, you should be using it. Anywhere, personal life, professional life, you should be using it, trust me. But for users with elevated privileges, so I'm a domain administrator, for example, you should have multi-factor authentication enabled for your domain admin accounts. If you're a global admin for Office 365, for example, you should have multi-factor authentication for that account. Your firewall, I did mention this, it does need to be a modern firewall with IPS IDS. So if you have an older firewall, or if you have an off-the-shelf kind of what we would describe as a home standard type firewall, it likely is not going to meet that criteria. You also have to have a service or capability to securely destroy paper, hard drives, and external media. So that's a requirement. Patching not only of your operating systems, but of third-party software that's likely on every computer, right? Your PDF reader, Java, web browsers, those are some good examples. And an antivirus or endpoint detection and response software that you can prove is being updated. So those are some things that some people, if my brother-in-law is handling the IT at my shop, that might not be being done even to a level 1. So that's really important to keep in mind as you look at level, these different levels, because what we're being told is if you're going to do business with the DoD, at a minimum, you're going to need to be level 1. Now, you may not, since they're doing the crawl, walk, run approach, you may not need to be at that this year, but you need to be working towards that. And that's out of the DoD's mouth, right? As we kind of start looking at level 2, again, what we're being told is we're not going to really certify you at level 2. Level 2 is there as kind of an interim step. So you're really getting your policies and procedures together that guide your cybersecurity team, because level 3 is going to require that you have at least a person, right, doing cybersecurity for you. And so that these practices can be done in a repeatable manner. Again, there's additional controls from NIST 800-171 that are pulled into level 2. There's a slide that kind of describes exactly, if you want to see exactly which ones those are, pulled from. We have a slide here in just a minute to show you, but that's really what we're being told is you won't really certify to a level 2 as far as contractual requirements. It's going to be level 1 and level 3. So you could be level 2, but that's essentially going to just mean you're moving towards a level 3 if you get certified as that. Level 3 is where the rubber hits the road, and the definitive piece. Again, I'm going to beat it into you. It's, do you handle CUI? So do you have it on your network? Do you have it on your servers? Do you transmit it in your email? That's really going to be the defining factor for whether you're going to be required to move to a level 3, and it is a bit of a jump. So it adds all of NIST 800-171 and 20 additional standards. It includes things like asset management, not only having disaster recovery plan and business continuity, but are you testing those? And you have proof that you're doing at least a tabletop test. Incident response. Do you not only have an incident response plan, are you doing penetration testing to test that incident response? And then this is a big one because this is an expensive item. Are you doing log review and threat detection and threat hunting? Do you have the people? We talked about the people a minute ago, the IT folks. Do you have the staff that has that time in their day and that capability to do that? Because that's demonstrating that you're doing that is a requirement. So those are some things that really take that to another level. And again, remember, it's maturity. They're looking at maturity. So a lot of mature companies out there, they're doing that, right? They're doing that. It is somewhat a new trend, even for small and medium businesses. But when you see there are breaches, every day in the news, right? And the interesting thing about breaches, not that they happen, but that the bad guys were in their network for 8 months. That's kind of crazy, right? But that's nobody really looking for or hunting for threats. or having the detection in place that would identify that. And you get a certain level of hacker in your network, they can run fairly undetected. It is a fairly sophisticated activity to detect some breaches, but it's just amazing that a lot of these larger companies, they're not really engaged in this to the level they need to be. So again, it's a jump to level 3. So we mentioned a SIEM. So that collects and analyzes logs from your network and your servers. So it sees, every time somebody logs in, every time you create a new account, every time you add someone to an administrative level account or group in your Active Directory, for example, that all generates logs, right? All of it does. I run a PowerShell script on your server. That's generating a log. I am connecting outbound to an IP address in China. That actually generates a log and should probably trigger somebody to take a look at that. That's the type of work and the type of activity involved with a SIEM. So it really does require trained IT staff. It is, you can find people out there that can do that work. It is an expensive piece of software. It's usually an annual subscription type thing. There's a lot of people out there though that offer SIEM solutions. The administrative policies and procedures, right? Having those is one thing, but you have to back that up with some type of proof. And again, we haven't seen what those artifacts are, but if you look at some of the other compliances that are out there, like SOC 2 or finance, right? If an auditor comes to your bank, they don't just want to see your administrative policy and procedure. They want to see, okay, when you had an incident or you tested this with the penetration test, what were the results of that? Are your controls working? That's really what an audit, it takes it to that next level. That's really what it does. So we talk about where does all this stuff come from, right? So and this is directly from the, we have a link for you that pulls down the whole 300-page plus PDF for the CMMC version. So this is directly pulled from that, but this shows you where they're getting these practices and that they kind of build on each other, right? So, for example, level 1, again, we talk about where are those controls coming from for level 1, where are the source, and level 2 the same way, and then like I said, level 3 and beyond, but most of them are coming from your NIST 800-171. That's where most of them are coming from. So we talk a lot about levels, and level 1 and level 3, the differences there. So the big question for you guys to answer before you start down this path of, all the expense and hand-wringing that's gonna ensue from this is really understanding, and you may already understand this. If you had contracts with the DoD for a while, you probably are familiar with what type of information are you handling. But it's really, really important for this to say, okay, what does the DoD say CUI is? And gosh, do we have that? Is that on our network, or do we handle that? Do we print out the paper even? Do we have that on our network? So the DoD has essentially 4 categories of CUI, and really, probably most of you, the first one, the controlled technical information, is going to be the most applicable. So I think there's links directly to the DoD's site as what's on this slide. But if we can just go, let's see, the CUI, the controlled technical information, we'll start with. And that is going to be things like research and engineering data, drawings, lists, specs, standards. Yeah, can we go to the next slide there, please? Thank you. Your manuals, your process sheets, your technical reports, any computer software code or source code. That is really what we're talking about. If you're handling that in your email that you manage, if it's on your servers, on your network or your computers, or even if you're printing it out, right? You're handling CUI. So that is really important to define up front. As far as critical infrastructure is really, for the DoD, is more munitions related, hazardous chemicals, pipelines, right? That type of infrastructure that the DoD has. If you're working with that, that is also considered CUI. If you're working with the Navy on nuclear propulsion, right? Anything to do with control of radiation, radioactivity, anything to do with the naval nuclear propulsion activities, that is also going to be considered CUI. And again, I guess I should just say, you know, we're not talking about top secret here, right? We're talking about unclassified information. So, and then controlled nuclear information. So the DoD has a special nuclear material, equipment, and facilities, and it's defined in a CFR. So those are really the categories, but I believe the first one is probably going to be the one that's more pertinent for you. So that should be an initial step for you, right? And so, you know, does your DoD contract or contracts involve CUI? You know, is it in your network? It's on your email? Do you have to have it to fulfill your contract? And it's, you know, it's going to be under your control at some point. So if you're getting it from a prime and maybe you're just logging into a prime's site to access it and you're not pulling it down, then you may just have to be level 1. So it's a really important distinction as far as, do you handle that CUI? So how do I know? How, you know, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm a little unclear on that, because it seems to be a really point of clarity. So since it's such a key in determining your level, yeah, who could you ask, right? Who's a good resource? So you can ask your prime or your contracting officer. Now, I will caution you, and this is out of the DoD's mouth as well. They have not done, you know, extensive training with the contracting officers yet. And they have not, so they may not be prepared to be able to tell you definitively, yes, your contract is going to be CMMC level such and such. They may not be able to, but that's a good place to start if you're looking for some information for your specific contract, right? So again, you know, if you don't handle CUI, you're still working with the DoD, you are going to need to meet level 1. So that's a place to start. I'm going to get into the cost, and I do have some specifics on the dollars for you, but just remember that cost, it's going to really be determined by that level. And so, because there's a difference between level 1 and level 3, very likely for what your current IT is doing, I would bet in most cases. And just remember that, you know, if you do kind of a gap assessment, right, you do a kind of a pre-audit of yourself, whether you do, you know, whether you engage someone or whether you do it yourself, as far as a kind of a formal risk assessment to see where your controls are and maybe where you're lacking, you know, you would come up with a work plan or a POAM. That's fine, but when it comes to actually being audited for your CMMC level, they're not going to consider that, oh, we're working towards this. They're going to look at what is implemented. So that's a really important distinction. So some cost considerations. So hopefully everybody's going to be calm here. But as I mentioned earlier, we do not know, and it has not been announced yet, what the cost of the actual CMMC audit is going to be. So we don't know what that is. But what's the cost of you achieving level 3 for maybe some of the things you're not doing, right? So there's gap assessments. So a risk assessment kind of mapped to CMMC. I've seen those as low as $2,000. I've seen them as high as $10,000. So that's a range just to kind of get yourself prepared for, you know, if you've not done a self-assessment questionnaire, it's definitely a place to start. If you have done one and you have a POAM and you feel good about your self-assessment questionnaire and how it was performed, then you already have a work plan to kind of get you to the level you feel like you need to be. So that may be a cost you can avoid. Go ahead.
Joe, we have a quick question. Can you share a little bit where we've gotten our general information on general costs here?
Well, that's partly my job. Yeah, so this is, I've been in the industry since 2000. Was a business owner until October when our company in Lexington, Kentucky was acquired by AME. So part of that is doing these proposals and seeing the competition and actually pricing this stuff. We, just to give you an aside, as a business, right, we're looking just like you guys. Should we do it in-house or should we outsource it, right? Should we add it as a product we can resell, you know? So for example, the SIM. So we decided, hey, we're gonna build our own team. We're gonna build our own tools because we were not satisfied with the tools on the market. So for example, the SIM, we shopped for a SIM, and that's what it was going to cost at the low end. We priced Alien Vault, good reputation, good company, but for just the software for a year, it was going to be $24,000. That didn't include the first person to analyze it or anything. That's the software. So, you know, we price these things. So this is from my experience.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So again, these varying costs, typically they are an annual subscription, and you can do two models. You can do on-premise where they load the software on your server, or you can do cloud-based, right, where you send your logs to the cloud and have access to your logs there. But you need somebody at level 3, you need to have some type of IT security staff, whether they're full-time or that's their part-time job. If you're any size at all, I'm not sure they'd be very successful doing it part-time because it is a daily activity. And IT security staff, they don't grow on trees, and I can tell you, you're going to start in that range and you can go on up based on what you're having them do and what experience you're looking for.
Hey, Joe, we have another question, and I think that you kind of went over it with that first one there. We have a question from Mark asking, is a pre-CMMC assessment a good idea for level 1 companies? And I would imagine the ballpark cost might be of that first area there, or is that different for, say, a level 1?
No, I think the security risk assessment is really looking at your existing controls. It's going to provide you with some templates for policies and procedures. So it's really going to help you cover that level 1, but it's really applies to level 3 as well, because the findings are going to drive, you know, your work plan, your POAM, what you need to do. So if you're level 1, you have maybe fewer things to work on, whereas if you're level 3, you may end up with more things to work on. But really, a security risk assessment is doing just that. It's taking a look at your business processes and where the data is, where your sensitive data is, and looking at the controls that you have in place. It's doing some vulnerability scanning, so it will do some validation. Hey, are you really patching? It'll, a good risk assessment will really find that out. And, that is really the DoD's recommendation as far as a place to start. If you haven't really felt like you've done a good job with doing a self-assessment questionnaire in the past, and you don't really have a good idea of, the whole POAM process, it's a really, really good place to start. And outside of compliance, it's a good place to start if you just want to be more secure as a company, right? And that cost is really going to be driven by a couple things: your number of locations, your number of users. Those are the kind of things that go into the mix, not really what level you're seeking. So hopefully I helped.
Yeah, I think you did. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And then, there's other things for level 3, right, that I mentioned: incident response, disaster recovery, business continuity. Well, those take time to develop because there are a lot of things that, yes, you can have a template, but at the end of the day, it's your business. You've got to know, okay, gosh, if we have a tornado and we can't work for a week, what do we do to fulfill our contracts? As part of your business continuity, your DR may be, okay, we're going to back up everything, but gosh, we just have an on-site backup. We don't have off-site. So what if we lose the on-site backup? So, and then, the other part is at least doing a tabletop exercise to go through it, right? To get all the folks in the room that are players in your DR plan and go through a tabletop scenario and document that and see if there's any weak links in that plan. So those are the kind of things that typically in an audit are looked at. And again, we don't have the specifics on the CMMC audit, exactly what artifacts they're going to ask for, but it would not surprise me that they're going to ask for those type of things. And so that's your folks' time, right? Your people's time to develop those if you don't have those, or to actually do that testing if you don't do that now.
We have a couple other questions here, Joe. One would be from Jean. Are there open source tools available to meet the SIM capabilities? And
well,
kind
there
of
are.
Okay, and then a two-parter here, because I think this might go into it, but we had another question saying that NIST has recommended a product called Security Onion as a SIM.
Okay. Yeah,
and if you know anything about that, and they say obviously we need someone to run it, but what's your opinion on the open source capability versus a commercial capability?
So remember I told you we looked at a commercial product and we decided to roll our own, right, as far as a SIM goes. So there's an excellent open source tool, right, and it's built on what's called the Elastic Stack. So it's elastic.co. There are several pieces to that search engine, which is really what it is. So it has open source tools that you would implement that do the log collection and send them to this search engine, Elastic. And it has a web-based front end called Kibana. It's excellent. It's very mature. However, it's Linux. It is not for the faint of heart as far as being able to implement it and do the care and feeding of it, but it is an excellent platform. So there are open source tools. It would depend, for me as a business person looking at it, it would depend on the talent and the staffing that I have available to me in my IT department.
Got it. And I think we've talked about this before. We have another question. You were talking about allowable expenses, and Doreen has the question of if we're aware of any support or aka funding that the DoD is providing to help small and medium-sized businesses. And I think I know the answer, but if you wouldn't mind touching on that, that would be great.
Well, there's throughout the country, in each state, there are manufacturing extension partners, MEPs, that are helping with some of these pre-audits to get you, at least, some help with that. But the DoD's take on this, and again, this is from presentations that I've listened to, is that this is a cost of doing business, that cybersecurity is a cost of doing business, and the only allowable expense is going to be the audit, which is every 3 years, is how long your certification is good for. And again, I don't have pricing on that. That has not been announced. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The other piece on this that I gotta mention, because it's so important and really it's low cost, and hopefully you should be doing this already just as part of doing business, but in the modern age, right? I think I just attended the Verizon has a report they issue every year. They've been doing it for about 7 years, called the Data Breach Incident Report, DBIR. And once again, for like 6 out of the 7 years, the number one way people are getting breached is phishing, right? So that's probably shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But one of your biggest defense is your people, training your people, right? You're on this call to get a little education, hopefully, and a little awareness, because knowledge is power, right? It goes a long way. So staff security awareness training, that can be one of your least expensive investments. However, if you're just having Joe from HR, talk to people, once a year for 30 minutes, you need some kind of proof that they're being trained, right, for level 3. So it's really nice to have kind of some type of web-based piece that folks can go to, and there's a test at the end, and that test is saved, and we have proof that they were trained. And then also level 3 takes it another step in that they're going to require you to have some phish testing to prove that your folks are aware of at least that risk, right? But good awareness training is not only phishing and how to avoid that, but also what's a good password, because that's another area. Remember, I talked to at the very start of this, I talked to how we breached this university we did a penetration test for. We just guessed a password. So that's not good. And then mobile devices are is another big area for security awareness training that really should be included for your folks. But you should be doing that probably anyway, besides all this, but that's just my opinion. Let's talk about the timeline for a second here, guys. So this started with a lot of research that that our tax dollars funded, that the DoD did with a few universities to come up with this framework. But the real timeline and clock started in January, when the final version 1.0 of CMMC was released. It is up to 1.02, mostly just some cosmetic changes, some language changes, but nothing content-wise. So that was announced January 30th, and there is a press conference the DoD did, and there's a link in your PowerPoint slide. But audits were supposed to begin in June. So it's not June yet, although the training hasn't happened yet. So with only 10 RFIs selected, they still might be able to begin audits later in June. They are not saying, DoD has not announced any delay in this timeline. In September of this year, they're going to expand to 10 additional RFPs. And then they're progressively going to add a CMMC level requirement to more contracts over the next 5 years, so that by January of 2026, the goal is all DoD contracts will require some level of CMMC. And again, they're saying the majority of those 330,000 subcontractors will be level 1. So the CUI, again, is the key. Keep in mind a couple points here. If you don't get information from an official source, and even there's been some questions about me as a resource, right? Which that's good. You should be questioning. So make sure you go to a couple links we'll give you. That is the horse's mouth, right? So no company is currently conducting CMMC audits. So keep that in mind. If somebody tries to sell you one, don't buy it. It's not in place yet. NIST 800-171, DFARS, and ITAR are still in place. So you're still supposed to be compliant with whatever your contract says currently. However, that is a formality. My understanding is in July, that will be supplanted with CMMC for your NIST 800-171. If you're still DFARS and ITAR, those requirements will still be in addition to. So the DoD recommends businesses should be preparing now. A pre-CMMC audit to identify your gaps, right? Unless you've already done your 800-171 self-assessment and you're confident in your POAM, that you should do a gap assessment. You should be working to complete any outstanding POAMs you have, because that can help you prepare to meet the level you need to meet. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Liz. She can give you some of these resources.
All right. Hi, everybody. I just want to draw your attention to this. Just to let everyone know, we will be sharing this PDF of this PowerPoint, and the links that are inside the PowerPoint will be live, so you'll be able to go out to all these resources. And I do believe we have one last question for you, Joe. And I don't know if anyone else has last questions before we get off here, but I'm going to try to answer these or have Joe answer these. Joe, we're asked, if audited for a level 3, but only meet level 2 criteria, will you be certified at level 2? We understand that's like a stepping stone, but
right.
Maybe you can answer that better.
So it's not entirely clear to me, but you would be certified at level 2. But what I'm understanding is there's not going to be that language in any contracts. It's going to be contracts you're level 1 or contracts you're level 3. So while you could be certified at level 2, that doesn't really help you. You're still just going to be level 1 as far as the language in the contracts is what I'm understanding.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to pass this over to Samantha to wrap us up and give you guys some closing statements.
Great. Thank you, Liz. What a great presentation. A lot of in-depth information, and obviously it sounds like there's a lot of questions that are still out there, but I'm sure if you have any other questions, Joe and Liz will be able to answer to you. I want to thank them both for joining us today, and also Jennifer, who is actually behind the scenes doing a lot of the technical work. We appreciate that she is behind the scenes doing that. So if you have any questions on today's webinar, you can contact myself or Joe or Liz. I think they provided their contact information prior. And also, I just want to let you know that these webinars that we're doing, we are doing them every Wednesday. So if you're interested in learning more about what's coming up, you can contact us or review on Facebook or LinkedIn on Purdue at Westgate. Next week's webinar is actually one that we'll be hosting with Sarah Norris, who is from When You Leave the Room. She will be presenting on real tips and techniques for virtual presentations. So a lot of us are having to pivot to in-person presentations or pitch competitions or virtual pitches, or excuse me, in-person pitches to virtual presentations. So she's going to be providing some inside information on how to make those more presentable and more informative to people. So again, thank you all for participating and joining. Thank you again, Jennifer, Liz, and Joe, for the great presentation. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.